Okay, so today we have the week number 5, and we have to continue learning the Angular, and inside it the selecting the components and all the things which regard for the component, which is the properties, data binding, template styles, and so on. So we already started started learning the components. So let's go to our examples. So week number 5 and group number 2, and so I want to start a new project which will be the inside it will show the examples for today's lecture. And if you remember from the previous lecture, we discussed and we showed how can we work with the components. And so let's open. So let's wait for a while installing the packages, and after that we'll open the two projects from the previous lecture and for the new project. So the recording is started, I think. Okay, it works. Okay. Okay, it finished. And not Visual Studio Code, WebStorm, and we want to open it. Okay, so let's wait while it's indexing our folders. Sorry. And let's open our previous example. So the previous example was, so the open, so the examples, web development here, previous and second group, so the demo. So in new window. So this was our previous example. So here I have the empty folder, so the empty project. So from the previous example, from the previous project, we have, so let's start it. So in ngserve. So ngserve, and here we go. Here I have the examples here, and we showed also the creating a new component and so on. So also removing showing the messages, changing the values inside of the variable. So here I have the if else, so the if condition, if directive, and so on. So today we have to understand more detailed about the component, and that's why we'll continue working with the to-do items. So that's why let's close the previous project, and we'll continue in the new project. We'll continue in the new project, and so Angular will hold the idea that you have to somehow separate your logic depending on the task, separate your logic by the components. So you can create as many as possible components, and each component will have their own logic for implementing any function. So by default, when we are creating a new project, so empty project, by default, it will create a component called app. So the folder name, in our case, it's the name of the component. It's an app component, and inside it will have by default 4 files for each one, for each purposes. So the structure of the name of the file, the first word will be the name of the name of the component until the first dot. So they will separated by the dots, and after name of the component will be the word component and extension for each file. So CSS file, HTML file, and two TypeScript files. So the spec TypeScript is just a testing file, and we have our component itself. So component itself, which will using the component decorator, will be the added the configuration to our component. So it's a class called the app component, which will have the title by default. The selector, we already know about it. So the app root, which we'll use over here. So the app root inside of the index, we are loading. By default, we are loading our app component at the inside of our web page. So if you have other components, you will have the connection between these components and between the hierarchy of the components. So the selector here, the name of the selector, so the template URL, which means which data, which elements have to be shown inside of this app component. When we are adding this app component on the web page, this element should be added to the on the page. And for using the styles for these elements can be used any files. So that's why we have the array here. One of them is by default, it's the app component CSS, which is empty here. Okay, so let's also serve. Okay, let's wait for compiling. So the core, common platform, browser, and so on, dynamic. Wait for it. And open the new terminal, because this terminal will be used for the recompiling and so on. For the new comments, we want to use a new terminal here. Okay, let's reload, and here we have the results. Okay, let's remove all the things over here until the router outlet. Okay, let's connect these two things here. And okay, here we go. Okay, we want to open the console also. We want to implement to-do list here, to-do list application here. And we have the app component, which will right now showing that some value. So let's open and change the title to the application. This title will be, let's show it, title from the app component, which is a to-do application over here. Okay, I think it's enough for the app component because we want to separate our logic using the different components. So that's why if you type ng and hit enter, you will get the list of options that you can use using the ng and combining any of these commands. One of them is generate, which says generates modifier files based on the schematic. Schematic means the rules of the creation. So the generate for creation of the component, we have the command called generate component and name of the component. You inside of the name, you will have different options. For instance, if you have only one word component, which is a hello, you can create just like hello. If the name of the component consists of one or two or more words, in that case, you will have two options. The first one is just each word writing as a capital letter. For instance, my hello component, my hello, for instance, tag, let it be tag. So in this case, the name of the component will be changed for like this. Like this by default. And on the other side, if you have the name of the component, if you are writing a name of the component like my or task list, you will have the name of the component like this by default, but the classes, as you see right now, let's hit the enter, and it says it was created a file called, inside of the SRC application, will have the name of the component called task list, as we set it here. Task list is the name of the component, and the folder name also the same. And inside it will have the 4 files. So by structure, we know that before the first dot will be the name of the component, as you can see, task list. And after that, the extension and Word component by default. So which is the CSS, empty. So the HTML, which is by default, will be just one paragraph, which is just a message from the component. And we have the class called, as you can see here, we have called task list using the dash syntaxes when we are writing a name of the component, and it understands that it should create a class called task list, and L is from the capital letter because it's the second word of our component. And if you are writing like this, you will have such like a component name which is not recommended because it's the not understandable for other developers and so on. So that's why it will be recommended to use such like a name, such like setting a name for your components. So separating them by dashes, because for you this command line tool will create the classes that will be helpful for you. Okay, the task list is the first component for which we created, and which is an empty one. Okay, inside of the HTML, we can see that this type of message. So how can we okay, how can we though, as you can see here from the task list, which is a selector by default, the app prefix will be added for any component. So that's why the task list is the name of the component, and app it's just a prefix which will just help for any other component. So inside of the app component, after the title, I want to show the application task list tag here. Application task list. So what this says, the compiler, something else would be identified. Let's start it again. I think I have the. Okay. Okay, as you can see here, inside of the application component, which is a root component, I'm adding inside of the HTML, I'm connecting as a child one, app list. So in our case, to do application, it is our app component, and this to do so the task list. So the task list works goes from this component that we added here as a child. So as a root, we have the app component, and as a child, we have the task list component. So what else will do this command for you when we are creating a new component? One of them is before the file creating the files and folders and content of the classes and so on. This command will do the one more thing here in the app module. As you can see here, it will automatically add this task list component that we created right now inside of the declarations, because Angular should know which component was created by you, and Angular should know all the things over here. So by default, app component was added here. For any new generated components from the command line, it will automatically add it to the declarations. But you can create component without any comments here by yourself. For instance, creating a new folder and creating a needed files and so on. in that case, you have to remember add them inside of the declarations, because it's important. Because if you don't add this component inside of the declarations, the Angular cannot understand your component and cannot identify your component. It's a very critical point. Okay, so to do. Okay. Okay, we have the task list component here. So inside of the task list, let's open the TS file and the HTML file. So from the previous example, from the previous lecture example, we know that we created a list of the string to store the items. So if you remember from the previous lecture group, from previous lecture project, we created a list of strings inside of the application, and we created a simple to-do list. So, but now we want to create a new file here, TypeScript file, inside of the app folder, which will hold our class. Our class, which is our interface. In some cases, it might be as an interface, but let's create our class for using in other file. We want to export it, export class called task. And inside of the task, I want to describe the properties of the task. From the previous lecture, we'll have only the string of the task. But now I want to create an ID, which is a number, the title, which is a string. And for now, it's enough, and we'll continue using them and extending them if we need. So let's go here. And inside of the task list, I want to create a new tasks variable, which will be from the data type of this variable will be the task class that I created right now. If you hit enter, it will show the different options, because we have in different libraries the class task, and the task that we created, it's the last one. That's why I'm selecting this one, and it will import it here from this. This task was imported over here. So new tasks, it's an array of tasks. That's why I like this. It's an array of tasks. And inside of the constructor, I want to initialize it. Initialize it as an empty task. So inside of this array will be the objects of this class, which will held by in each object will have the ID and title. Okay, let's write inside of the task list our loop that we already know. So the ng4. So let task of new tasks, and inside it I want to print out the task task ID. So as you can see here, if I'm hitting the dot, it will show the properties of this class, because we created our object as a class. If you will have only list here, we don't have such like option. Okay, and here we have the task title, and that's it. That's it for now. And for testing it, to show the contents, so let's remove this one. And to show the list of items here, I want to create a new task here. So I want to add one more element, new task. And as you can see here, without any data, because we are not setting any title or any ID. So that's why it's created. So you can create one more thing here, for instance, two tasks, but without any data. So that's why I want to implement the constructor from this class. So we know what is a constructor. It means, for instance, if you will get a title inside of the constructor, which is a string data type. So let's set the default value as an empty string. So the title, so this title equals to title. So in that case, I can pass their task 1 as an argument when I'm creating task 2, and in that case you will have the such like data, and you can do it. So you can set it for the ID also. So ID. So this ID equals to ID. For instance, 1 and 2. Okay, task 1 and task 2. So as you can see here, we have the list. List is working. So here, before the list, I want to add field set. As in previous example, field set. Inside of the field set, we have the input, the text input, and button. Button, add item, add to do, or add something. Add to do, let it be add to do. And inside of the input, we have to somehow get the data from this input. And when I'm adding this, when I'm clicking this button, I want to create a new object of the task class and add it to this array. And this is the task. So for that, I want to call the click event add to do function when I'm clicking the button. Clicking to the button, and let's open it. And that's it for now. So to do is working. So one more thing is here, we have to somehow bind our input to store the value. For that, I want to create a new property of the class, which is a current task. Let it be current task, which is one task, and that's why the data type will be the task. And let's initialize inside of the constructor so that this current task equals to new task. And new task, inside of the new task, the ID, let it be by default 1. But it's not correct because all new created items will be the 1, but for now it's okay. Okay, ID by default is 1. The current task was created, and what I want to do is inside of the task list, I want to use an ng model. For using ng model, you have to open the app model here and add inside of the imports the forms model. And after adding this model, you can use the ng model as the input and output. So about the input outputs, we will talk with later. ng model, and here we have the current task dot title. I want to store what I'm writing over here, over inside of the input. I want to store inside of the current title, so the current task dot title. So which means this object will be the current changing object. So after that, so if it's okay for the title, when I'm clicking to the button, I want to check. First of all, check that the current task title is not equal to the empty. If so, I want to add to the new tasks the current task. And that's it. So let's check it. If you click this button, you will have the new item. By default, the ID is 1 because ID is 1 because we added here, so as a 1. So for setting an ID correctly, so the current task ID equals to, so how can we get the next ID? Just for getting a length of the array. So the new tasks length in our case 1, 2. To get a 3, we have to add just 1. if you add it, you will have the such like item here, and it works. But the problem is, if you adding this new item or changing the something here, you will have the change over here also. Why? Because we are using the same object. We added this object to our array, but when I am changing something, it will change also. If you click the again and again, it will have the same object here, which is a problem. And what we have to do is, after adding this item, this current item to our object, we have to reinitialize this current item. So the current item equals to just new task, and that's it. New task means this constructor will be called again, and it will create the empty, so the new object of this class, and title will be the empty. Let's check it again. Okay, it works. And as you can see, input also will be the empty after adding the new item. Okay, so it works. So we can remove these items. Oh, let's leave it. Okay, let's leave it. So what we want to do is, okay, we want to add button over, which is the remove button. About the remove button, we already know that when I'm clicking this button, I will have to remove task, and we want to get a task ID here to remove item from the list. And let's implement this function. So the index, which is a number, and we want to new task list. We want to filter it. Filter x, which is a x ID, should not be equal to index, and that's it. So the index comes from the front side, which is the task ID, which ID should be removed, and we want to just filter it. So after that, if you click it, you can remove the needed item here, and as before from the previous lecture. So what I want to do now, the task is we want to separate the logic of each item here. For instance, if I'm adding the for instance, the images, if I'm adding the new logic inside of the task item. For instance, here we have each item. So it's the first item, it's the second item, and so on. If I am increasing the logic of each item, I want to separate the logic as a new component. For that, I want to create a new component over here. So as we know from the previous example, we created like this. But we have option called just a short version of the generate. It's just a G letter. G component. The component name is task item, which is which will hold all the thing for the one item inside of the list. So the task item, and it will create task item component over here. App module will be added by default. And what I want to do, so as you know from the app component, inside of the app component, we imported task list as a child. But in our task list HTML, I want to import the task item as each item which we are listing. We are listing over here. That's why these two lines should be inside of the task item. Inside of the task item, and I want to copy these items, put them over here, and comment it. And inside of the LI, I want to use application task item as each element of the task list. And as you can see here, for our new added components, I'm adding the new component on the web page, which is the task item. As you can see here, task item, and this message goes from here. So from here, the task item is working. So this is cool. So we have added the new component as a child of the task list. Which means each a new challenge. So the new challenge says, how can I pass this data, the list, hold it on side of our main list, the new task list, stored inside of the task list. And inside of the HTML, I have to somehow, this data, this task should be passed to this component, which is from the parent component, which is for this purpose, we'll have the new thing here. So the new ability here, which is called input. Input decorator, which is decorators will be started from this side. So an input. And you will have the two options here, and you have to import the first one, which is a core inside of the core model. And this input, which is input decorator, which will add the input values to your component inside of the task item, inside of the child component, inside of this component. I want to add input component, input value, which is let's call it like a task. You can leave like this, or you can set a data type, which is a task from this our file. It's also okay. So using these lines, using importing the input, importing our task, adding this one line to our child component, you will have option. You will have option inside of the parent component when you are using a task item. We added this item here. Inside of the task item, you will have the such like option. If you open these square brackets, you will have task input. So we have the two options. So let's here. Inputs for components. If you will have the square brackets, you will have the inputs for the components. If you will have the parentheses, you will have outputs from component. So we have the two options. So as you can see here, the WebStorm will suggest that we have the task input here. If you are changing, it's just the name of the variable. If you are changing like a ASD, you will have the such like a input here, ASD, and you have to cover it using the square brackets. So let's rename it as a task, and as a task here, as an input, I am passing this variable, which is over here. So this is the name of the input here, and on the right side, which is each element over here. And that's why this value, and that's it, this value pass it to the child component, and this item can be shown inside of the HTML. So let's copy so let's remove this one. Let's copy these two lines and put them inside of the task item. And as you can see, it works perfectly. So it works perfectly because we are passing this task to the task item, and inside of the task item HTML, we are using this input task, and showing the needed information and calling the needed function. So it works, it shows, but the problem is here when I'm adding, it works perfectly also when I'm adding something. But the problem is when I'm removing something. When I'm removing this, it says remove task is not defined, which means remove task function we don't have inside of the task item, because remove task was located inside of the parent component. Let's copy this one. Let's copy this one and put it inside of the child component. Inside of the task item, as we know, this remove button located inside of the task item, and when I'm clicking to this button, I want to call the function inside of the task item. But our list from where I have to remove the current item located inside of the main parent component, which is a task list. And problem and challenge here is I have to somehow pass the indicator or some signal to the parent component that the parent component should remove the current item. So if I'm clicking to this remove, the parent component, which is a task list, should remove this item from the list. For that, we have the second option, which is output. So output from the core module. From the core module, and we have here the second option. So output we want to use for the events. For events, in our case, it's a remove. So that's why. So let's call it just a remove. And here we have to use the class called event emitter. Event emitter also from the core module. Event emitter, it's a class that can be used for passing the data from the child component to the parent component, which is the output. So the creation of any output should be like this. Event emitter, it's a class that will help to us to send the data from the child component to the parent, from bottom to the up. So, okay, we created an output, and what we have to do is we want to open the HTML file. So the HTML file, and when I'm clicking to the remove task button over here, I cannot change the new tasks. That's why I'm removing this one. And what I can do is using our event emitter, using our remove, I can emit, which means I can send the message to the parent component. Send the message like, so please remove this item from this index. So I am sending here task ID, which means this ID should remove it from the parent component. And this event emitter, task of the event emitter, they send this data to the parent component. How? And after adding this output, you can open the parent component's HTML. And when we set it our input, okay, when we set it our input here, so we have option here for the outputs. And outputs, as you said it here, as we understood here, will be marked and will be written using the parentheses. And we have here two options. Task, it's as an input from the parent. We want to send the data to the child, like using the inputs, which is square brackets. And from the child, which is over here, using the event emitter, we are sending the message to the parent component using the output, which is over here. And let's create some function. So the on task remove. And how can we get this data from the child? We have option called event here. So this $sign and event will hold the data that goes from the child. And let's create this function inside of the parent component, which will hold the index and number. Index number from the child. So we have here index and number from child, and here we have the new task, and we can immediately filter our list using the ID is not equal to index. So the index, and that's it. That's it. Let's try it. So if you click this button, it will remove the second one. So remove. So what we know, so we know about the inputs. So in the child class, you can create a variable using the input decorator, which says this data will come from the parent, and you can pass it like this as an attribute. And second one is output. Output says I have some event and I have some data. I want to send it to the parent. For that, I want to create an output, which is the event emitter, and when in our HTML file, when some event is occurs, in our case it's a remove event. When remove event is occurs, I want to emit or send the message to the parent using the any data. It might be index, it might be string, it might be some object, it doesn't matter. So index was sent to the parent. So how can handle parent objects? Parent class will hold it using this output event, so output event, and creating a new function, getting a data like this. So the new function task will hold this index and will remove the needed data. So if you can find the difference or the similarities from the existing events, for instance, here we have the in button, we have the click event. And from this lecture, you have to understand that click event, it's a output from the button object. Same thing here, the task item, remove its event from this object. And when we are removing, we have the such like a function and we will have the input. The same thing here. And we have here input and here we have the output. And we talked about the two-way data binding. Two-way data binding with, which means this object and the output object will be stored in one variable. And here I have the ng model. And this says this variable, this title variable, at the same time will be as an output and the same time will be as an input. That's why it's called as two-way data binding. And when I'm changing from the front side, from the website, when I'm changing some value, this title variable will store this value. When I'm changing inside of the list, for instance here, this current title equals to something. It will immediately show inside of the web page, which is called also a two-way data binding. From the code, you can change the value. It will be stored inside or will be showed on the web page, or when you are changing something, this value will be immediately stored inside of the current title. So this is called, I think this also will be the understandable for you starting from this to today's lecture. Okay, so let's continue. What is the time? So the time we have already. So let's take a 5 minutes break and we'll continue it. So guys, let's continue. Sorry for the wait, so we have some problems here. Okay. So let's continue. So we understood about the inputs and outputs here. Inputs to the child component and outputs from the child component. Okay, so let's move on and try to understand other things also. So for now, let's do like adding the new item, so the new property to the task object, which is called isDone. Let it be as a Boolean value, and isDone by default isDone equals to false, which is a done or not done task. Okay. And after that, what I'm trying to do for each item is I want to add new paragraph here. And inside of the paragraph, I want to add input, but not text, which is a checkbox. And what is a checkbox? You know about it. This is like a checkbox. When we have it, we can change or selecting the some object. So for the checkbox, and after checkbox, let it be like a question or done or not. And if it's done, for instance, if I am selecting this checkbox, I want to somehow react for this functionality. For instance, if I'm selecting, I want to throw the text of this to-do list, for instance. And for the input check, we have the different inputs and outputs. For instance, for inputs, we have, for instance, checked input, which will have the true or false value. For instance, if it's a true, it says by default it's checked. By default it's checked when we have the true value here. If it's a false, it's by default, which will have the false value, which is not checked. And this is the input for this item. And we'll have the outputs also. For instance, change, it's the output from this event, which will have the action when I'm clicking to this. So when I'm clicking to this, so let's change. So isDone, change it function. IsDone, change it, and inside of the item, let's create such like a function, and console log isDone, change it. And that's it. So if I'm changing this item here, it says it will trigger the event. As we can see that you have the parentheses, it means the output from this tag, and this function will be called. So what I want to do, I want to use the property that I added to the task class, which is isDone, which is isDone, which is isDone, and I want to use this isDone for this isChecked value. For that, I want to use just task and isDone. And isDone by default it's false. That's why, which is a not selected. If I'm sending it to the true from the constructor, we can see that if they are the selected by default, let it be as a false. Okay, isChecked, it's understandable, and this one is also okay. And when I am changing something, I want to somehow add a new value. For instance, let it be like adding the class to the paragraph we have done task. If it's a done task class added to the text, In that case, I want to add CSS file, the new CSS, which is a text decoration, should be line through. So as you can see here, if in our paragraphs, if you have the done task class, the task will be set as a line through. But this class, I want to add if and only if I'm checking this done value here. If I'm changing the done value here, I want to change the value over here. But we have the two options. So we have the different options. So we can use this checked value for the is done, which is which will hold this value of the checkbox. And on the other side, we want to change the value of the is done depending on the click it or not click it, which is as you can guess, which is a two-way data binding. Is done value will be changed from this input and from this output. For this, I want to use, as you know, ng model input and output also, which is a two-way binding. And we want to bind it. So we want to bind it to the task is done. Which means if I'm changing this value to the, so let's show the value of the content of this task is done. The task is done by default is false. That's why it's not checked. If I am changing it, it becomes as a true. If I am changing again, it becomes as a false. Which this task will do for us, it's an ng model. Ng model is task done for this input means if I'm changing, it will change the value of the input and output. Okay, it's perfect. It works. What I have to do is this line through will be added. So this done class will be added if and only if this is done is equals to true. For that, I have different options. One of them is like this. Like this, we have two options. The first one is ng class. Ng class, which is an input for any for any tag, inside of the web page. For the Angular, ng class will give the right and any expression here. So the expression which will be added as a class for the selected property. In our case, selected property. So selected tag, it's a paragraph. So what goes from the expression will added as a class. For that, we want to use task is done. If task is done, question mark, which is a ternary operator, which is a just the if block. If is done is true, in that case, I want to use a done task. I want to add the class done task. Otherwise means just adding the column. Otherwise, it's empty, which means we don't need to add any class if done task is false. And after that, you can check it. If I'm changing this checkbox, it changes the value of is done, and immediately if is done is checked, if is done is changed. Depending on the value, it will add or remove the task due to the done task class for this paragraph. And you can see the result over here. As you can see here, depending on the value, it will add or remove the class done task. And that's it. And this option is using the ng class. And here we have the expression that will return the any string. So pay attention that we have here single quotas, and here we have the double quotas. So so we have here expressions. So let's comment and let's copy this line and put it over here and comment the first one. The above expression, which is the ng class, I commented, and I want to show the second one, which is a class input, which is ng class will give you ability to write an expression. Class input, using the class input, you can use the dot notations, which means done task And here we have the true or false. If it's a true, it will add this done-task class to this property. So using the dot notation, the class it's a input. Using dot notation, you can add this class to this paragraph or remove it, depending on the value here, true or false. If it's a false, it will be just removed. And here we have only, you have to link it to the isDone value here. And that's it. You can select it and unselect it depending on the value of the isDone. You can select and unselect. Okay, I think this is also clear. Okay, and what we want to do now is, so I can remove it, I can add it. Okay, what I want to do is, the time is, okay, 14. Okay, when I am selecting the done, before except showing the text of the to-do item, I want to create a new list inside of the task list. So after the new list, I want to create a done list, done tasks, which is also the type done, the task, and the array. Then after that, what I'm trying to do is, when I'm changing the value of the checkbox, I want to add it to the new list, which is called done tasks. So let's open the tasks list. So here I have the lists over here. So let's add here H2 new to-dos. New to-dos here. And after that, let's copy the same thing here and put the done to-dos. And inside of the done, I want to use the done tasks. Done tasks, in our case, it's an empty one. So let's move it over here. So done tasks, done to-dos, to-do list is empty. That's why done tasks empty. That's why the list is empty. So without any information, it's not informable. That's why I want to show some message here. If so, ng if done task list, how can I identify the content of the done task list if there are any variable or not? Using the length. If the length of the done task is more than 0, so it says cannot read property length of undefined. So done task is undefined. Why? Because we don't initialize our done task list. So this done task equals to array list, and after that it works. So we are adding the UL if and only if the done task list more than 1, so more than 0. So let's add some paragraph here, and ng if done task length equals to 0, the list is empty, which means if done task list is 0, done task length is 0, we want to show such like a message. So let's do it for the new items also. Let's cover them with the div. Cover them like the div. Okay, we have the new div. Okay, so we have here done task. We have here new tasks, and this if expression also should be over here. and here should be the new tasks. But this comparison, which is more than 0, can be leave it like this also. Why? Because length will be the 0 or something. If it's a 0, it's a false. It's a something not 0. It means if it's it is true. It might be 1, 2, or 4. So that's why this expression can be also like just changing the length of the array. So here I have the done array. Here I have the list array. So that's why. So list is empty. The list is empty. Okay, if I'm removing the element and after removing the last element, the new task becomes length becomes as a 0. That's why it should show such like a message. As you can see here, it shows message. If I'm changing the value and adding the new item, it becomes as a value over here. Okay, I think this is also clear. So the next task is when I'm changing the value of the done or not done, I want to change the list. I want to change the list of the current objects. For instance, if I am selecting it as a done, I want to move it to the done list. So for that, I want to open our task item and the event when we are changing the value. When we are changing the value of the input over here, ngModel will store the value of the current checkbox. And event for the changing is, we know about it, it's a change. It's a change, and is done is change. It can be used again. Is done is change it. Is done change it. And when I'm changing the value of the current object here, I want to send the message to the parent object, so the parent list, that current object should be removed from the current list, from the new list, and added to the done list. For that, as you guess, we have to create one more output parameter, which is let it be done also, which is a done, and it's enough. So when when our is done checkbox is clicked. So depending on the depending on the value that was stored inside of the task is done, I have to send a message. I have to send message to the parent. I have to emit. So let's emit all the object, not only ID or not only title or is done property. Let's emit the task, whole task. So the current task, which was changed, so in which was changed the value of the input, was emitted to the parent object, which is done event exists inside of the item. So which means inside of the list, you can get one more one more output here, which is done. So on is done, change it, and here we have the event again. Event in our case, it's a whole task object. Why? Because we are passing here task, but here only ID. So we have here task objects, and let's create this function. And as an argument, we have to get a task, which is a type also will be the task. And that's it. So when I'm changing the item inside of the new to do, it will output this event using the done output and pass the current changed task. Inside of the list, I want to check if task is done becomes as a true. So which means by default it's false, because that's why it is not selected. If I'm selecting it, it becomes as a true, which means if is done is true. In that case, what I have to do, I have to remove this item from the new list and add it to the done list. So we already have the function for the removing from the current list, which is here over here, which will have the one ID, and it will remove the current ID from the new list. So that's why I want to just call this function. So the on task on task remove and call pass their task.id, because I have to delete current object from the new list. And on the same time, for the done task list, I have to push it. I have to push current task hold, not ID, whole current task. I have to push like this. Okay, so let's check it. If I'm selecting this item, it becomes inside of the done task. Why? Because done task is equals to true, and it goes inside the if block, and I'm removing it inside of the new tasks over here and adding it to the done task. If I'm selecting the second one also here, and here I have the message. And we have the opposite side. When I'm unselecting the done button from the done, so the checkbox over here, I have to return it back to the news list. That's why when I'm changing the item, inside of the task list item, when I'm changing the checkbox, it means it will always change the value of the is task. So is done. So it means even if I'm changing here, this function is called, because when I'm when I'm changing any event, it doesn't matter if it's a true, if it's false. When I'm changing, I will call this is done change it function inside of the item, and it will go and send a message to the parents. It doesn't matter if it's a true or false. That's why I'm changing it. I'm checking it over here. If it's a true, I'm doing such like a thing. If it's a false, it means else part. If it's a false, it means I'm unselecting it. I'm unselecting it from there. In that case, I want to this done task equals to this done task. So filter. So xid not equals to task ID, which is I have to remove from the done task, from the done list, the current object, because it's unselected, is done is false. And this, so the new items, in the new items should we add current task. So let's check it. If I am changing over here, it becomes in the done list, changing it again, in the done list, changing it to the 2, but it doesn't work. Why? Let's check it. Okay, the done list filter not equals to task ID. Okay, so let's console log here. Okay. Okay, over here. Okay. So it becomes as the true. If I'm unselecting, it doesn't work because this event doesn't getting the result. So let's change. So let's check it again. So the change is done. So let's, do I have any example here? Let's serve it again. I think this is a problem for the
Может, мы task-list HTML не передали, Dan?
So I think so. Let's check it again. Okay, is done. Is done was changed over here. Done list. Oh, okay. We don't have any output here. any output here for inside of the to do, inside of the done list. So that's why it doesn't work, because the done output from the task item should be inside of the done list also. That's why we don't have any action here. So let's check it again. So I'm changing it to the to-do list and changing it back. And as you can see here, we can change it or remove it, or remove inside of the to-do items. It doesn't work because why? Because inside of the on task remove, we are removing inside of the new inside of the new list, but inside of the done list we have to do the same thing, but inside of from the done list. That's why you can do it. You can do for instance task on task remove on done task remove and on new task remove. For instance, here we have the new task remove, and here we have the done task remove. And in that case, here should be the done task. Here also done task. And here we have the on new task remove. And even here we can use also on done task remove and pass here task ID. So because we have here the same thing, and I can use the different options here. So let's check it again. So pass it to the done and remove it from there. Pass it to the done, give it back, remove it over here. So okay, I think it's clear. So we have the two functions for removing from the two lists. So the new list and done list. When we are changing the checkbox, depending on the is done, we are moving the current task depending on the value. It will be removed from the new list and added to the new one, removed from the done list and added to the new one. Same thing for other things. For instance, we will have here the different problems. For instance, if I am selecting over here 2 and give it get it back, but as we added here inside of the on change to the end of the function, so end of the array, so that's why it added as the last one. But by our orders, it should be between these two objects. So that's why we have different options. You can after adding this item to the new list, you can sort it again by the IDs to get a proper list. When we get back, for instance, if I'm adding this to the done list and give it back, it becomes as the last element. So that's why we have different options. So let's see. So when I am returning back to the new list, I want to sort our new list. So we know about the sorting from the JavaScript. From the JavaScript, we have the function called sort, which might have the two values A and B, which is the array. Which is arrow function, and it might be like ID of the first argument if it's more than ID of the second argument. I want to return it true to increase it by to sort it by increasing order. R -1. The sort function will take as a result, so as a returning part. So let's write it for without any arrow function. In that case, you have to write function A and B, and if A ID more than B ID, in that case you have to return 1. Otherwise, you have to return -1. So this is the same thing as before, but without any arrow function. So this arrow function becomes like this. So if you are putting like opposite side, the second one should be greater than. In that case, you will have the decreasing order. So the decreasing order array. So let's check it. So we want to add one more thing here, and we want to set second to the done list. And from the done list, when we are getting it back, it should be between these two objects. The same thing here when we have done list. When we have done list, it should be the same thing. Because when we have over here, here, and then we have the second one, it should be between these two objects. Okay. The problem might be also over here. For instance, if I'm adding the new item, and for instance, second one, so for instance, last one, and let's add the new item here. And as you can see here, the IDs are the same. If you get back, you will have the two IDs here with the same number. Why? Because while we are adding here, we want to see just length of the task over here and +1. When we get some items, so as you can see here, all the two items with the ID 3 was removed, and one of them becomes as a done, which is not correct, which is a misunderstanding between the IDs. So that's why this expression can be should be something like change it, because we have such like a problem. So for instance, here we have the two objects, and when we are adding a new item, we are saying that the new task's length, which is a 2 + 1, which is a 3, should be the ID of the new item. And here we have the problem. And if you add here to the done list, in the done list, you have two objects. And if you unselect it, you have only one object of two. That's why. So you will have the different options for setting the IDs of the setting IDs of the tasks. It might be generated by different libraries or different other things. But one of them is, what can we do is create some variable over here. For instance, variable over here from cnt equals to 0, and so cnt equals to 0 and increment it by 1 by 1. Another thing is just creating a current ID. Let it be number equals to 0, and this current ID will be the static. About the static values, you already know from the other subjects, and if you have the object-oriented programming, the static fields or static properties will share the value of this property among all objects of the current class, which means if you create the t equals to task, t2 equals to also task, if you are incrementing or changing the value of the current ID, for instance, for the first argument will be, for instance, here we have the current, so not ID, so let it be this current, not this, it's a static, that's why the task, the current ID, for instance, ++, which means when we are creating a one object, it becomes current ID becomes as a 1. For the second object, current ID will be this 1, and it becomes as a 2. So the static fields will be shared between all the objects. So we have first object, second object, it might be the different objects. So when we are creating a new object, the current ID will be the same. So it will be shared. The value will be shared. That's why this value I want to use inside of the ID. Inside of the ID task, and here we have, here we don't have any required IDs when we are creating an item. So when we are creating an item, I want to let it be so ID, and inside of the list, so I can remove the ID over here, and as you can see here, we have IDs from the static field, but it starts from 0. That's why let's change it. So let's change it. Oh, sorry. Let's change it to the 1, because we have the post increment here. We have the pre-increment and we have the post increment. That's why the 1 becomes as a value, and after that it will be increased. So let's add it new item. Let's change the ID to the other list, and let's add one more item. But we have problem here, so let's check it again. When we are adding, so this line should be removed. Why? Because we already set our static ID for the new item. That's why we can remove it. Check it again. I'm adding new item, changing it to the other list, and adding the new item over here. And as you can see here, we have the ID number 4. Why? Because we have 1, 2, 3, and we have the 4th object of the class. And we said that static field will be the same and will be shared between all the objects. Currently, we have on the web page, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 objects of the class task. That's why current ID just will be incremented one by one. And in this case, you will not have the problem with the IDs and removing or adding the new things. For instance, remove this one, and this one. If you add the new item, you will have the 5. Why? Because we have the static field, which is shared between the objects. Okay. Okay, let's see. So the time. So 10 minutes. So what we have to discuss today, before, except the inputs and outputs and other things, we have to understand what is this implements and on init. So if you open, so how many? Okay. Okay, if you open the Angular component lifecycle. So lifecycle hooks, lifecycle methods. What does it mean? For instance, so let's remove the existing objects, the default objects over here, which is empty, should be here. Okay. So what does it mean, the life cycle? For instance, in our web page, in our currently web page, we don't have any component of the task item. So we don't have any task item here. So when we are trying to create a one item, the task item component was created. For instance, if I am adding it, here I have the task item component. If I am clicking to the remove button, it disappears from the web page. So starting from creation of the new component until the destroying it from the web page, we have the different type of stages and different type of events that can be handled by the methods. These methods called life cycles. So these life cycle methods you can find over here in the documentation. We have the different methods. One of them is onChange and so on. So they can be used using the interfaces. So we explained interface like if you have the object-oriented programming language, you will also discuss about it more deeply. So let's create an interface. Interface example is animal. Animal, and inside of the animal, we say that animals can run, animals can sleep. And this is our interface. It's just a rule of the creation of the animals. And for now, we want to create a class called dog, which will implement when we have the interfaces, we can implement that interfaces in our classes. And as you can see here, we have the empty class, but we have the warning from the TS link. It says method running from the interface animal is not implemented. So the methods here, we have the run and sleep. Inside of the dog, inside of the any class, it doesn't matter. It might be dog, it might be other class. Inside of the child classes, which are implements our interface, they should implement by themselves the functions that we declare inside of our class, inside of our animal interface. If you create a class called cat, which implements also animal, it should also implement the function called run and function called sleep. What for the purpose of the creation of the animal or purpose of the creation of the interface is, if you are creating some class and implementing some interface, all the classes like you, for instance, dog and cat and other animals here, should implement these methods. Why? Because other developers, our workers should know about the. They already after seeing the interface and inside of the interface, if you have the run and sleep, if someone sees somewhere the object of the dog, the other developer can immediately call the sleep function or immediately call the run function without any thinking. Why? Because interface will require to implement those methods for all child classes. So this is an explanation of the interface and how can we use them. So inside of the Angular, we have the such like interfaces for getting the lifecycle methods that we discussed before. So one of them is on init when we create a new item. So the new component, this on init method, so on init interface will be implemented by default. If you open it, you can see that if it's also interface like we created before, and it has one method called ng on init, which is just a void. And here we have the empty on init method. If you remove it, you will have the message here that you have to override the method from the interface. Like this, you have other options also. On change, on destroy. So on destroy. For on change, you have to implement the method called ng on change. For ng destroying, for getting the hook for this value, you will have to implement on and destroy. So let's write some logs here. So task item component constructor. Task item component ng on init. Task item component ng on change. Task item component ng on destroy. So we don't have any task item here. I'm adding these all interfaces. So one of the advantages of interface, we can inside of the one class, we can implement many interfaces, but we can extend only from the one class. This is the difference between the class and interface. Okay, so we don't have any task item here because lists are empty, and we added the logs, and we want to see the sequence of the calling the methods. For instance, I'm adding one item, which means over here I have to see the messages. So I'm running and adding the new item. It says test component constructor, which means constructor. It doesn't locate it inside of any interface. It goes to the class, the rule of the class. For any class, you will have the constructor, which is it doesn't matter this class is component or not. Even if you are creating a class, for instance, person. So it's a person. The constructor of the person will be called at first. It doesn't matter which class. That's why the constructor will be called at first. And after that, as you can see, ng on change. This ng on change interface will hook this method, and why this method will implemented first, because for any component we will have such like a properties. For instance, if you open list, you will have such like a three properties: new list, the done list, and current list. And this interface on change event, after creating the current class, current component, it will bind all the values inside of the properties to your object, to your component, even if you don't have any changes. At the starting point, on change interface will look to your class and see all the properties and bind them using your HTML file over here without any changes. That's why it goes at first. Oh, sorry. It goes at first. And after on changing one time, you will have the init function here. Init on on init will be triggered if and only if your component completely created and binded all the values with your HTML files. And that's why it's recommended to fetch data from other resources here. So ng on init, it's a best function where we have to get data from the other resources. In our course, we have to add the connection between your backend side and frontend side. So from the Angular, if you want to send a message for getting initial values for your component, in our case, ng on init, it's the best case for getting them from the resource and binding them to your properties. If you are doing it inside of the constructor, it might be, depending on the internet speed, it might be not correct, because if your component is not completely created, not completely binded, your fetched data can be missed. That's why it's guaranteed inside of the ng init. The fetching the data, it's the best practice. So we added new item, so we can see the constructor. So the on ng on change and ng on init, which means this was created. And if I am removing it, it means this item, this component will be removed from the web page. In that case, you might use the ng on destroy interface, and inside of the destroy function. And if you click this button, you can see that ng on destroy will be triggered. What for can be used this method? For instance, your component will open new stream to connecting to some resource, for instance, some database or the real-time streams connected when this component was created. And after it destroyed from the web page, if you don't close the streams, your page will be overheated, and the speed of the program will be decreased. That's why ng on destroy, it's just a closing part of the opened objects. For instance, if you open some file, you have to close it. If you open some stream, you have to close it. If you start the connection with some database, you have to close it. If you start some timing, so for instance, intervals, you have to clear the connections. In that cases, you can use on change, so on destroy function. So on destroy function can be used also. So when you are using an on change function, you have to be careful. Why? Because on change function will be triggered always when we have the change inside of the component. For instance, so if you are changing the checkbox here, it means our component will change the value of the current object. So the task, it's our property, then our task changes the values. In that case, as you can see, after destroying and removing from the new list, the destroy was called, and for adding to the new item, also on change was called. For any change inside of the component will be called this ng on change method. That's why you don't have to put complex calculations or complex functions inside of the on change, because it might be a problem with the speed of your component. And if and only if you want to see the middleware between the changes of the two states, in that case you can check the minimum logic of your properties and do some manipulations if needed. But it's not recommended to use many complex functions inside of ng on init, inside of ng on change. Inside of these two functions, it's just the creation of the function or the component. It's just the removing of the component. And those are the main lifecycle hooks. The priority you already seen. So these functions can be used in different options. So inside of the documentation, you can read more about it. It's about the other things. So the custom changes can be done using the nd to check. You can call them manually and so on. And one of this table show the by priority. So the by priority, this function will be called first, and second one, if you have all of these functions, this priority will be called one by one until the ng destroy. But in our case, we have only 3 of them, which are the more useful and more common lists. Okay, I think for today it's enough. The time is up, so we have the 30 seconds. So the time for your questions. Guys, can you hear me? Any questions?
Yes. What about Lab 5? You didn't upload it yet?
Sorry, about the Lab 5, I will upload to today's lecture, I think after 1 hour. And inside of the Lab 5, you have to work like this using the inputs and all. So I cannot hear you. Can you write your question if it's possible? Problems with from your side, I think. Who's asking? Can you write your question to the chat? While he's writing, any other questions from the other students?
How will be the midterm?
So midterm will be on the practice task. So it means almost the same tasks like your lab works, but I think about the time will be announced a little bit later, how many times we will have on the midterm. So you will have to show your practical knowledges about the Angular, like in our examples here, what I'm showing and what you are doing in the lab works. The similar tasks will be for, I think, for 2 hours or for 2.5 hours. And you have to do it online and show it so that defends it one by one to us to get your scores. It's our midterm.
So it will be in 2 weeks, yes? 7th and 8th weeks.
So why 2 weeks? Because so the students have to defend all the work after writing the midterm. So after writing the midterm, I think you will have to upload to the GitHub, and after that we'll set the timetable for each group, and will be the defense of that midterm. That's why we have as an extra 2 weeks to cover all the students.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions, guys? The people asking the microphone was a little bit, or internet speed was a little bit slower. That's why someone cannot ask the question. I think the problem from the internet.
А когда дедлайн 5 лабораторной работы, извините?
The deadlines are the same as before. Deadlines are the same as before, and I will upload after today's lecture. Okay, other questions? So, time is up. If you don't have any questions, I will. So let's upload. What is Angular component G2. So I uploaded today's examples to the GitHub. You already know about the link of the GitHub. I think this is no problem. And if you don't have questions, let's stop the recording.